And welcome to NARST. It's very exciting to be here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our first plenary speaker, Dr. Linda Rosen. She's from Change the Equation, and Dr. Rosen's career has begun at the crossroads of education policy and math and science education. She started her career as a high school mathematics teacher, and over the years she has taught mathematics all the way through the graduate school level. While this perspective is always in the forefront of her thinking, she also finds most compelling the development of and implementation of education policies and practices that enhance learning in STEM. And most of all, she wants to ensure that every student, regardless of ethnicity or economic background, has the opportunity to learn rigorous math and science as a launching pad for nearly every career that it would be in the 21st century. Dr. Rosen is currently the CEO of Change the Equation, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, CEO-led initiative that is mobilizing the business community to improve quality of STEM learning in the United States with a focus on strategic philanthropy and employee engagement in K-12 STEM learning. Previously, Dr. Rosen was the Senior Vice President for the National Alliance of Business and the Senior Advisor to the U.S. Education Secretary Richard Riley during the Clinton administration, and she provided counsel to the Secretary on math and science. At the request of Secretary Riley, she served as the Executive Director of the National Commission on Mathematics and Science Teaching for the 21st Century, familiarly known as the John Glenn Commission. Dr. Rosen has served as the Executive Director of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, which is the largest professional organization of teachers of math and also teacher educators. And she also served as the National Academy of Sciences Associate Executive Director of the Mathematical Sciences Education Board. And it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Rosen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. It feels like home to be with a group of educators and researchers, more than some of the other worlds I sometimes live in. But I do want to know who is going to do a study on why people pick the seats that they pick in the auditorium. Come on down if you want. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, but this is the only mic that we have. So we're going to ask you to sort of come a little bit towards us by the time we get to questions. But I promise I'll be entertaining enough that you really won't want to leave early. So what I saw, and I had a nice little bird's eye view looking down, this is an amazing hotel, was the passion. And I could see it in the table conversations, and was also very impressed with the relative youth of the crowd, which is a really exciting thing to see, that there are another generation of researchers who are coming up who share that same passion and that same desire. But the truth is that any group like this is a bit of a congregation. I mean, you're seated as if you were a congregation. And even when there are disagreements, they may be profound about research issues, there still is a great deal of similarity, because you can talk the talk and walk the walk and use the acronyms and refer to research, and you all know what you're talking about. What's the biggest challenge that we face are those people who are not in the congregation, who are either peeking in the tabernacle or running away from it as fast as they can. And there are plenty of both of those types of people. So if you heard a little bit of my career trajectory, and the last chunk of it has been working more with the business community. And I particularly enjoyed that because they are sometimes peeking in the tabernacle and sometimes running as far away as they can. So it's been an incredible learning experience for me to put my feet in other people's shoes and begin to understand what it is they think about and what it is that motivates them. So I'm glad to share some of that with you today. I will welcome all questions. You could even interrupt me, but then I'd have to take the mic down. So why don't we wait and hold questions till the end? But let me jump right in. So we think, and I am going to use the acronym STEM. I know that you're most interested in that first letter. There used to be a slide that I used that had the S in 40-point font, the T in 20-point font, the E in 8-point font, and the M, because I'm a mathematician, was in 66-point font. But the STEM acronym is really beginning to catch on, although when we're most candid, we know that in the K-12 space, it's really the S and the M that count. So we think STEM is everywhere, but here's a map that shows STEM jobs as a percent of the total employment state by state, and this is a projection for 2022. So even though you think everyone that you know is somehow affiliated with STEM, you see that there are not very many green states where the percentage goes up to a little over 16%. Many more of them are red, and Rhode Island happens to be white because it's right in the middle. So it's smaller numbers than we sometimes think when you talk about jobs. But what's important is what a STEM job does. So almost all innovation is grounded in STEM, whether it's coming up with a new idea, a new process, a new product. All of those kinds of innovation is really what drives the economy and what has driven the US economy for years, and other nations as well. Innovation is where it's at. So that's one important part. But this is a recent study that just came out that said that if you look in regional areas, any one employee who has a high-tech job, which means a reasonable income, is actually generating 4.3 additional jobs in the local economy. Well, they have a reasonable income. They are buying goods, they are buying houses, they need real estates, they need attorneys. In other words, all of the service occupations to solid income is really worthwhile. So governors across the country are eager to pull in companies and businesses that employ STEM professionals, precisely because it's an engine of growth. Just to give you a context, knowing that you're all researchers, the next biggest multiplier is manufacturing. So for every one job in manufacturing, it generates 1.4 additional jobs. Tremendous difference. We're 3 times greater in this kind of relationship. The interesting thing about predictions about future jobs and future economy is that no one really knows. Labor economists can tell you what has happened, they can tell you what is happening, sort of, and they can guess what's going to happen. And I like this slide just to make that point. There was a study done by the business school at the University of Maryland at College Park, and it estimated that in 2011, Facebook, I figured you'd all recognize this, added about 182,000 jobs nationwide. And remember, in 2011, we were just coming out of the recession. And in total, they contributed over $12 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars in wages to the US economy. How many people does Facebook employ? About 2,000, just to give you a sense of that. And what was it about? It was very much about developing apps. Well, 10 years ago, nobody even knew what an app was. But today, or in this study, in fact, there were 53,000 jobs across the country in software companies that create apps. And then there are all the businesses that supply app developers, just as I showed you a moment ago. So this is the challenge in prediction about economic growth. What is the great new idea, or I should say ideas that are out there that we can't even imagine today, and try to think about what kind of employment we'll need? There's a theme to my remarks so far, and if you've missed it, I'll make it clear. The business community sees itself as the customer of the education pipeline. And what I want to do is make you aware of some of the attitudes that that customer has. So I talked about the benefit to the economy, a regional economy, a state economy, a national economy, but I also want to point out something about beginning salaries. So these are just recent graduates, and you can see that the average graduate is the bar in blue. Many STEM occupations, first time out of the gate, first job, are getting more. I do have to point out that it's less in the sciences, and you can see those on the bottom two bars. I don't have an answer for why. You can ask me, and I won't be able to answer that. But be that as it may, they are below the average salaries, and that's one of the issues that kids who are increasingly savvy about choosing majors are beginning to pay attention to. So let's talk about this issue that relates to hiring. Change the Equation, you heard a moment ago, is a coalition of major businesses, and these are the big boys. These are the Fortune 100s, the Fortune 500s. These are the real big guys. They came together in 2010 and formed Change the Equation because they were worried about the STEM pipeline. They were worried about the knowledge and skills of the young people who were coming into those jobs, and they wanted to be more effective and more strategic in their efforts around K-12 education. We were formally launched by President Obama at the White House, but we are nonpartisan and nonprofit. I was always asked in 2011, well, what are you going to do if the president loses? And I said, well, what president doesn't care about STEM, and what governor doesn't care about STEM? And it is really an issue that we think will transcend any particular party or any particular government. Be that as it may, it's been very nice to have the backing of the White House and the interest in these few years. Change the Equation partnered with the National Business Roundtable, which I presume you've heard of. Both of these organizations are membership organizations, and the member is actually the CEO. No, I don't talk to CEOs every day. I do talk to them some, but the actual member are the CEOs. And we joined together to do a survey of our membership. We have lots of overlapping members, but it was a total survey of 232 companies, and 54% of them responded. What you can see is that combination of respondents account for a rather large amount of revenue and a rather large number of employees. And what we wanted to understand was what they were thinking about in terms of jobs. So we asked them, how many jobs do you have open right now? And you can see that number in the middle, a little over 200,000. And of those jobs that you have open, which ones require basic STEM literacy and which ones advanced STEM literacy? Well, with researchers, I have to define those terms. With anybody, I have to define those terms. Basic STEM literacy refers to foundational STEM skills that all U.S. educated working-age adults should possess. In other words, every high school graduate should be STEM literate, regardless of what they go forward to do with their lives. Advanced STEM knowledge refers to STEM knowledge and skills typically taught in post-secondary institutions in preparation for specialized occupations that require deeper STEM knowledge. So what you can see in this graphic is that about 60% of the job openings require basic STEM literacy, and a little over 40% require advanced STEM literacy. I know they add up to more than 100%, But it's partly, there were some CEOs who completed this and said, well, if you need to have advanced STEM literacy, you must also need basic STEM literacy, which I think was an artifact of the way the question was worded. The various sectors around the circle reflect how many of the companies fit into each of those sectors. So you're not going to see something that just says a science company, but certainly there are lots of representation of science companies. So we went a step further, and we said, when you look at your job pool, you look at the applicant pool, we know how many jobs you have, we know what you need. When you look at the potential applicants, and you look at those you actually hire, what percentage of them can demonstrate the skill level that you need? Well, this was really discouraging. And what you see in the bar on the left is that over 2/3 of the applicants were not found to have basic STEM literacy. 2/3 of the applicants. Now that's a fairly damning statement really about K-12, almost more than higher ed, because we defined basic STEM literacy as looking at what every educated adult ought to know. When you looked at who they actually hired, 45% were lacking in basic STEM literacy. So what does that mean? Well, I'm the HR person, and I've got 57 jobs that I have to fill, and I've got to pick the best candidates from the pool that I've got, and I really have to fill those jobs. So I sometimes have to take people who are going to need remediation. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that any more than higher ed institutions want to go back and teach, high school algebra all over again. But it's the situation that employers are finding themselves in. So the $64,000 question, I'm showing my age, I think, when I say that, was to say to the employers, so do you have a problem with the skills gap or not? And you can see there are different levels of being worried, very problematical, and somewhat problematical. If you just look at the two darkest red, that's over half are really having trouble finding employees. And then we asked, so you've hired these folks, they don't quite have everything you need. What is it that you find is most lacking? Where do you have to put your money into additional training? Well, the good news for science education is the one at the bottom is basic STEM literacy, which isn't quite correlated with the data that I showed you earlier. The next blue bar up is advanced science knowledge. The numbers where they're having the greatest difficulty is in advanced IT, in business, and in my own field, quantitative knowledge. But those are really not separate. But these are the ways in which companies are finding they need to spend their money. Well, some folks are being hired, but some folks are not. And this is looking at bachelor's degrees and above between 2011 and 2014. So you see in data, there's sort of 2008 to 2011, which were the dark days of the recession. 2011 moving on to now are when things are beginning to look better. And if you look at a lot of this kind of data, you really begin to see a difference. So this is unemployment 2011 to 2014. And you see that generally in non-STEM, unemployment is at 7%. Those other categories are all less, but you see that the life and physical sciences, while less than non-STEM, is still the higher, 5.4%. So what's an employer going to do? Well, they're concerned, they're worried, they recognize that innovation lies in a very vibrant, talented, knowledgeable workforce, and they want to do their part. But this is a recent analysis that shows what would happen to our GDP if we just met the international average on math and science, on TIMSS, just met the international average. And that would really be an additional $2.5 trillion. So corporate America said, well, we have to do something. And part of what we have to do is really understand the problem. I know this audience knows this data cold, but on this, it's clearly old news. On the PISA exam in science, we're 21st out of 34 countries. This is the hierarchy for what it means for science proficiency. Hopefully you can read that. It's the last two columns, the most sophisticated level of the hierarchy, where you really see that innovation, that creativity. So at the highest level, it's link different information sources and explanations and use evidence from those sources to justify decisions, demonstrate advanced scientific thinking and reasoning, and use scientific understanding in support of solutions to unfamiliar scientific situations. That's that innovation piece that we've talked about. So this is part of the concern. Change the Equation has undertaken a project that we call our vital signs. How many here have heard of the vital signs? Boy, not too many. I'm glad I'm here. It is on our website. It is the most comprehensive set of indicators about K-12 STEM learning that exist anywhere. Now, careful. I said it is the most comprehensive. I didn't say it is a comprehensive set. There are so many questions, and you all know them better than I, for which we don't yet have answers. So we have collected all this information in one place. We keep it up to date regularly. Some of it we collect from other sources. We have NAEP data, for example, on here. And there are several categories. There are state-by-state reports. This is an example of Texas. And it's a very short, brief synopsis of the data, let's say, on Texas. We have national data on a same set of indicators. And we have particular topic briefs. So this is widely used. It is honestly more used by policy wonks and researchers than it is by the business community. They want the short version of what we found. And even in the short version, which is what we've tried to make vital signs. But it is a very rich resource, and you can customize the table. So if you're in a rural state, for example, and you want to compare yourself to another rural state, there are ways for it to generate very particular tables on it. So let me just go through a little bit of data. Again, part of the vital signs. This is proficiency on 8th grade NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, what we call our nation's report card. And you see that it's science from 2011 and math from 2015. Science is the dark blue. And let's just talk about that word proficient for a moment. According to the federal designation, proficient means that a student is ready to go on to the next grade level, the next level of sophistication. So seeing percentages as low as these are, because it's out of 100% for each category, black girls, you see 9% are proficient. It means 91% are not really ready to go on. When the business community looks at this data, that's one thing that they worry about, the proficiency levels. But the other thing they worry about is what you see when you disaggregate data, either by gender, by race, because it's very well known among employers that the best solutions to problems and challenges come from diverse groups working in collaboration. People from different backgrounds, people with different perspectives, and with all due respect to all the white males out there, you're just not going to hack it as a diverse group. So this is really a problem and extremely worrisome, because remember, we're trying to at least get to the international average in PISA. And talking about proficiency, Change the Equation did a study, and what we did was a crosswalk between where states set their bar for proficiency on the state assessment, crosswalked to NAEP. And what you can see that if you live in the states near the right, if you get the letter, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, your son is doing wonderfully well, and according to the state of X, he is proficient," it's meaningful, according to NAEP. You could get that same letter in the red states, and it's not going to be meaningful. And the place that we're seeing this the most is among kids who move around a lot, particularly military dependents, because they think they're doing just fine, and then they go to a new state and they discover that things are quite different. Now, all of the issues swirling around now about common assessments and whether states are over-testing, and all the discussion that you all probably know as well as I, we have to keep this in mind. In the past, when states have been left to their own devices, politics have ruled, not education. There's not a single governor who wants to go up and say, "Well, I'm really not an education governor. I really don't care what the kids do." No one's going to say that. And to show that you're an education governor, you have to have a high pass rate on your state assessment. How do you get a high pass rate? Lower the bar. So this is, to me in particular, worrisome. Here's more of the vital signs kind of data, and this is asking teachers whether or not they have the resources that they need to teach science, 8th grade teachers. So about a third, over a third, said they don't have what they need. I mean, they've got the deck stacked against them right from the beginning. The numbers are even worse for teachers of minority students, when half of them say they don't have what we need. It's no wonder that they can't necessarily teach the science that they want to. More data. I thought I'd pick something near and dear to your heart, and that's physics. So what you can see when you look at this slide, again, when it's disaggregated by race, that minority students are more likely to attend schools that do not offer physics at all. And this is data coming from the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. These are devastating numbers, worse than calculus, and calculus is not so great either. The College Board estimates that there are about 2,000 students of color every year who have the ability and capability to take AP, but they don't take an AP course. Well, one reason, it's not offered. It's not in their school. Another reason, no one's suggesting that they take AP. A third reason, it's just not part of the milieu that would make them think that they ought to. So we're really letting those kids down, and we need to think about what we can do. Another important issue is the gender breakdown. So this is showing females And you can see in the biological sciences, females rock. Many of them are going into medicine. And you hear all the time from young women that they want to go into a profession that's going to do good, not just do well. But look at these other fields. The most devastating and frankly perplexing one is computer science. The fall that you see has to do with the dot-com bust and the recession. Women, for some reason, did not go back into computer science at nearly the same rate men is. So I don't know the answer to that one. I really don't. But a lot of companies, and you may have seen some of this in the news, are beginning to talk about what they need to do to have more gender diversity in addition to racial diversity in high tech. These are the facts. This is what the data shows. And the question for the business community is, what can it do and what should it do? Well, I would argue that the business community has two things. It has resources in terms of money, corporate social responsibility, philanthropic dollars, and it has time. And what I mean by time, it's time from experts. So what Change the Equation has been working on is helping corporate America figure out how to use its time and treasure most effectively. And to do that, we created a searchable database that we call STEMWORKS. There are over 60 programs in STEMWORKS at the moment. Some of them are after-school programs. Some of them are teacher professional development. Some of them are in-school programs. There's no requirement what they should be. Programs self-nominate to get in, but about a dozen companies set up what they call design principles for effective STEM philanthropy, and I'll show you those design principles in a moment. And they set up a rubric. They know the word rubric in the business community, or at least we told them the word rubric, and now they know it. And any program that feels that it's accomplished on these criteria is welcome to submit an application to be considered. We put up a very heavy firewall. I didn't want one of my CEOs calling and saying, you know, Linda, we've developed this great program. I'd like to see it in STEMWORKS. So I just say, well, sure, I'd like to see it in STEMWORKS too, but you've got to have them apply to, it happens to be WestEd, happens to be our vendor, who's looking through the materials. So we promise that we don't share the names of any programs that submit that are not accepted into STEMWORKS. Every program gets a response that says why we didn't agree with your self-evaluation of the reason that you should get in. And we encourage any program that doesn't get in to strengthen itself and to reapply, and we have a number of those doing that. So here's the set of design principles. It's a bit of apple pie and motherhood, no surprises. We certainly are looking for inquiry and hands-on learning. We want to focus on diversity, so we especially are interested in programs that are trying to crack that nugget and nut of underrepresented groups. And what you see at the bottom is just a picture of the rubric. So on that rubric, there are three categories: accomplished, developing, and not really there yet. Nobody puts themselves in the not really there yet who actually submits. But I'll give you an example, and this is a made-up example. This is not a real application. A program could say, we care deeply about getting students of color into this program. And then the next question is, well, what do you do about it? Well, we tell the principal. We would say probably not really there yet. If you had a program that said, we are really focused on going to parents in churches and telling them about getting their kids into this program, and we have a track record of having 72% of the students in the program from underrepresented groups. We, of course, would call that developed. So that just gives you an example, and you see on the rubric these different examples. This is just a screenshot. There are many, many more, but we have spotlights where we put different programs up, and this is just 3 particular programs that are in STEMWORKS that are about the environment. The portal is currently opened. It's closing April 16th, so you probably, either you or if you have a colleague, maybe don't have time to do it because it's not an insignificant amount of work, but the portal closes, we take all the programs through, and then we reopen it. And it reopens in about 2 months, plus or minus epsilon. I don't know the exact date it will reopen. So what we're trying to do is change the conversation. We're trying to say clearly to STEM programs that are looking for funding, this is what funders value. This is what will turn their heads. This is what will capture their attention. And if you're not already doing this, you might want to think about ways in which you can. And we're trying to help support them in changing. At the same time, we're saying to corporate America, these programs are going to give you a return on your investment. No, I don't think we've got every program in there that should be. That's why we open the portal and close it periodically. But you can rest assured that if you're investing in these programs, you are going to get some bang for your buck. And companies are very worried about that. You have to realize when it's philanthropic dollars, those are dollars not going to shareholders. And therefore, they have to be able to persuade those shareholders that their corporate social responsibility is well worth it and is very effective. So it's an interesting tension that the companies have. I will say that corporate America, by and large, doesn't want to be think of as Machiavellian in its interest in STEM learning. Yes, they care about their workforce, but they wouldn't talk about it the way I have. They would just say it's morally imperative that we get more kids to higher levels and that we get greater diversity at higher levels. What we have done with STEMWORKS is set up relationships now with 3 states, and there are discussions with more states underway. And let me talk a little bit about them. The first was Iowa, and this is actually an effort right in the governor's office of Iowa. Anybody here from Iowa? Okay, I don't know if you know about this. Yes, okay, great. So the governor has a line item in the budget that says this amount of money will go to programs that have demonstrated their effectiveness in raising the level of STEM learning. It could be raising the level of inspiration. It could be ways to get kids interested. It could be informing them about careers. It's not all just about tests, but it's that whole panoply of characteristics of getting young people more interested in STEM. So Iowa turned to us and said, help us do this process where we will identify the programs. So there's an Iowa version of STEMWORKS. They hoped to get lots of ag programs. The ag programs were not yet at the level of accomplishment to get into STEMWORKS, but that was their original goal. And they hope to continue to have that money. So that's a prime example of public-private funding. The state has put in $3 million, and a few companies have put in only $200,000 in this first, in 2015. So that's one example. A second example is Colorado, who are doing their first version of STEMWORKS right now. They've just opened their version of the portal. So we provide training to Colorado or Iowa-based people, whomever the organization selects, and then we step out of the way. And they decide who gets in and who doesn't. Colorado has a challenge grant from a private foundation, and they are putting that challenge grant out there, trying to get companies to put money in and trying to get the state legislature to put money in to a Colorado pot. So that process is pretty new. I don't know quite what's going to happen. Last but not least is Arizona. And Arizona partnership has been the longest with Change the Equation. They've actually done STEMWORKS twice, and they were particularly hoping to find some programs that were effective with Native Americans, which is a large part of their population, and also in the rural parts of the state. They too didn't quite have the success they wanted. That doesn't mean that the programs didn't submit, but the programs still needed to have more evidence to show that they were effective. And at the moment, these 3 states are pretty happy. As I mentioned, we're in conversation with several more. So Change the Equation is continually bringing these programs in front of our corporate members. At every opportunity that we have, we are saying, you really need to look at these programs. You really need to think about using your CSR money in ways that are going to have impact. We also find that because it's on the web, we have nothing behind a firewall, zero. We learned that we have several companies using STEMWORKS that aren't even members of Change the Equation, which I took as a victory. And there are private foundations that have been using it. So it's becoming part of the lexicon, and I'm pleased about that. So where are we going forward? Well, we want to continue to expand and get support for the current 60-some programs that are in there. And they cover K-12, both age, grade level, STEM, and STEM, girls and boys. I mean, it's a whole variety of things. We want to continue to add new programs to STEMWORKS and to get companies to provide support. And that's what I mean by the fact that we open our portal, as do the states as well. But the last is a new initiative, and it's partly capturing the time of the employees who work for our member companies. So you all can remember needing judges for the science fair, needing mentors to help with a robotics project, hoping that you could take the kids on a field trip to see some real science or some real engineering in action. And best of all, if you could get a paid internship for your high school seniors, which would not only take their enthusiasm and build it for post-secondary education, but I said the word paid, so they have a little extra cash to use. So we are embarking on a matchmaking exercise, is the best way that I can think about it. We are looking at a subset of, quote, STEM schools, and we have a working definition of what we mean by STEM schools. We're going to start in a certain region of the country, and we're going to identify what it is that schools particularly want of the business community. And a number of these kind of employee engagement. You have to remember that when you're asking an employee to come during the school day, he or she is not at work. So either he or she is taking leave or their employer is paying for it. So it's not an easy lift for everyone, and it doesn't mean that everyone has the time and availability to do that. So we're going to look at the schools and we're going to look at the employers in those regions and see what level of match we can make between them. We're a small staff of 6. We happen to be headquartered in Washington, D.C., which is an artifact of where I live as the first CEO, rather than because it needed to be in Washington, D.C. So we ultimately have to empower folks at the local level. We'll work with chambers, we'll work with local BRTs, we'll work with local workforce investment boards to try to sustain this effort and grow it. The whole idea is to grow it. So when we say a STEM school, we mean there are rigorous academics in STEM, there are real-world applications of STEM, there are links that the kids learn to the community and to the world of work, and that STEM is interdisciplinary. Some part of it is interdisciplinary. We just released in its 1.0 version a guide for employers on work-based learning. I talked to any number of STEM schools, and the mantra is always the same. We need to show our kids how what they're learning has applicability. That's what's going to get them enthused. That's what's going to get them inspired. That's what's going to keep them trying to learn. And they're looking to employers to do this. By and large, to date, it's mostly local employers who have been responding to STEM schools, but what we're trying to do is get some of these mega companies, frankly, international companies, to participate and do that as well. So that's how to find me, and I'd like to open it up to questions, comments, complaints. Oh, come on. Wait a minute. Can you sort of walk towards us and we'll walk towards you?
I thank you for your presentation. And I do know of the work because I'm part of an organization that is in STEMWORKS, the Vista organization. But I need to push back a little. Your member companies, your members who are part of Change the Equation, they represent a really powerful block of people in this country, of organizations. We know that children's achievement is directly related to their parents' income. These are the same companies that many times, they don't advocate for living wages or for changes at the local levels that could significantly impact what happens in our schools. We have schools in this country that their science labs they look like third world labs. That's where it could change. That's where we need things to happen. Parents making more money and involving parents instead of looking at having organizations work with kids and bringing people into the school to work with kids. I have a problem with that approach.
Remember I said at the beginning of the talk that one of the things that's most interesting is trying to learn to walk in another person's shoes. It's just this kind of issue that we get to. I would not argue at all with anything that you said. Remember, I was a part of the Clinton administration. So let me tell you a story in this process. Change the Equation for the first 4 years was very strongly supportive of Common Core and Next Gen. But what does that mean, we were strongly supportive? It meant that the staff was writing pieces, was trying to, go out and talk. I had a much tougher time convincing any of my CEOs to do that. Not because they didn't believe in Common Core and Next Gen, but rather because it's a complicated decision tree in their own mind, when they go to talk to the governor, for example, they have a whole host of issues that are related to their business. And they get in to talk to the governor in ways that you and I don't. They have a whole host of issues about taxes, any number of state regulations. And they have a certain obligation to their company, just as we have it to our employers, to put those factors first on the table. And I had the darndest time getting them to be forthright and outspoken about Common Core. And part of it, and this has been very painful to me to understand this, but they have their own rationale for deciding when and how they're going to speak up. One of the best examples is ExxonMobil. So I would guess that most everybody here has seen one of the ExxonMobil Common Core and Next Gen ads on TV. They're really good. I mean, they play them like at Super Bowl time. Well, maybe not Super Bowl, but play them at times when lots of people are looking at TV. They have invested unbelievable money in supporting Common Core. Where's Texas? Where's ExxonMobil? In Texas, a non-Common Core state. Well, he gave up with his governor, the CEO. It just wasn't worth it. There were too many political issues. So I don't have a great answer for you. I have instead an honest answer for you. And that is that we all think that they ought to do X, Y, and Z. But at the moment, from what I can see, the two best leverage points are time and treasure. Other questions? Come on, I know business is the big bad guy.
Let me try an alternative route for pushback as well, which is what I hear implicit in what you're saying and much of what you're talking about is the economic imperative, that science education serves the economy. Okay? I want to take a different kind of stance, okay, and say that's true. I don't disagree from that point of view, but that's not the primary function of education. Primary function of education is to pass on the culture that we have and the best ideas and knowledge that we have. In fact, actually, if you put the economic imperative in front of a lot of kids, it gives them a reason to opt out. Because they can say, well, actually, only 16% are actually going to get that kind of job. Okay, I'm more interested in those other jobs. I don't need to learn this stuff. It doesn't matter at all. And it means that the discourse within the classroom, okay, is flawed. And it's flawed because that's the kind of language and rhetoric that science teachers are using, rather than presenting to them, these ideas that I'm presenting to you are amazing ideas. They're awesome. They're disturbing. Okay, these are things that it's good for you to know just for your own good. And this language of the economic imperative, which has riddled science education for the last 50 or 60 years, okay, has got us nowhere, I think, in terms of convincing all students that science is something that matters, and it doesn't happen with other disciplines, and why should it happen with science?
I must not have been clear. There's a rationale for why business does what it does, but in no way am I suggesting that that's the rationale that's presented to the kids. I would say that we in education, and I put myself there, have created a straw person. It's STEM or it's the humanities. It's workforce preparation, or it's becoming a full and rich Renaissance human being. I don't know, I guess you can't say Renaissance anymore, but you know what I mean by that phrase. That's just a straw man from my point of view. It's not borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, but what we do know is that the young generation now wants to know why. What's the question I hated to hear as a math teacher? why are we learning this? And it was much harder for me in some of my top-level math classes to answer that than I think it might be for some science teachers. I'm not sure, I've never taught science. But the younger generation is challenging us in a way that my generation didn't, and even my daughter's generation has not. The kids in school have a different ethos. And all this push for work-based learning examples, why? I mean, just read the literature. What is getting kids turned on? It's solving a problem in their community. It's addressing something that they see as an injustice. But those are all, in a sense, maybe work-based is not the greatest phrase, life-based. And that's really what we're talking about. So I push back a little on your pushback, even though I understand where you're coming from. I'm sorry?
We could have a longer discussion.
Okay. I saw another hand somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not from the US, so my question is, why are we learning this? But I guess my point really is, what have you learned from other countries that you've been able to take advantage of in developing your initiative?
Thanks. Great question. Great question. One of the most interesting things that we've learned is the system in, it's Scandinavia, but I'm drawing a blank on the exact country, and I apologize for that. Too many lights, I think. Which has a system that takes kids 16 through 19 and puts them into paid apprenticeships. They could be very high level. I mean, these could be kids who are on the trajectory to get a PhD at some point. So I'm not talking about manufacturing necessarily. All those kids in apprenticeships, 80% of the money is paid by the companies in that country, and only 20% by the government, by public funds. And it is part of their secondary education. Well, a group, I was not among them, a group of folks went on a tour and were just in awe of all this, because they could see that it gave kids a chance to audition their own interests in various contexts, and it gave the workplace youthful and new ideas. And they were real jobs. They weren't made-up jobs. They weren't, you know, making the coffee, is what we'd say in the U.S. And this group came back and said, why is it that we in the U.S. could never do that? And I'm sorry to say, I think it's a cultural thing, but I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening in my lifetime, let's put it that way. And how we segue from that kind of culture to what we've got in the States and in many other countries, I mean, there are many of other countries that are like us, has been keeping me up at night. I'll put it that way. Siemens is a German company, and Siemens has been talking about apprenticeships in the US for years. They have a huge apprenticeship program in Germany. Siemens USA hires young people and sends them to Germany for the apprenticeship and then brings them back to the US. And they keep trying to talk up this notion because it's a basic part of the German educational system and has been. But they're not buying it here. They're really not buying it here. So that's, it's not for lack of trying to get other people. It seems to me, and I don't have the answer to this, but we're working on it, is that we've got to make an argument to the companies about how it's in their best interests in terms of their bottom line. Now look, you can look down your nose at that, but every one of your employers, higher ed institution or not, is worried about the bottom line. So it's not just corporations. And if we can make clear to them how these kind of investments and some of the things that are being done in other countries that are having a big impact help their bottom line, I think we'll be able to get the door open, but I'm not there yet. Other questions?
Thanks. The piece that I'm looking for here is how do the individual things that you described add up to some dramatic, large, the kind of large-scale dramatic change that we're all really trying to see? I mean, we are often accused of incremental improvements, and what I'm not seeing is the big grand thing that could take that major leap. Is there can you talk about that a little bit?
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question. First, let me say that companies' philanthropic budgets have basically not grown since 2008. And those of you who are trying to get money for projects and for programs know this painfully. They have not grown. Hopefully, as all the recession becomes a distant memory, they are going to begin to grow. But even if they grew by 10% or by 15%, if you added up all of that money, both in terms of employee time and in terms of real cash, it would be a drop in the bucket, right? The federal government puts in about 7 or 8 cents of every education dollar, and the rest is state and local. The business community doesn't even put in 50 cents of that education dollar. So just because they're big companies, and they are big, doesn't mean that they have the resources to make that significant kind of change. What I thought would be the biggest contribution would be towards big policies, like getting Next Gen in and making sure that there's professional development and making sure that every school has a lab that it needs, and that every teacher has the knowledge he or she needs to succeed, and that assessments are, I mean, that was me, that I wanted to use the gravitas of these folks. And that was really the scale up. That hasn't worked. And I think there are real and legitimate reasons for why it hasn't worked. Whether it will ever work is a good question, but I think that what we all tend to do is we sort of point the fingers to the people on the right and the left of us and think that they've got to fix it. So we did undertake an effort where we tried to reach employees who are, many of whom are also parents. And we tried to say, you need to be advocates because we've got elected school boards, elected state officials, elected governors. You need to be an advocate for good policies. And we had some pickup, some interest in that. But the companies right now are running away from Common Core and Next Gen, running as fast as they can. And it's not because they don't believe in it. It's because they can't see that their participation is a win. Someone in the back.
Hello. Hi, Linda. How are you doing? Great. So, yeah, I was back there. So my question is, hearing all this, we're researchers. I'm curious about what, not that this would drive our research agenda, but just for curiosity, what kind of research that comes out of our research community would be of interest to the corporations that are members of Change the Equation, if any? Again, I don't expect people to change their agendas, but I'm just curious. I think we'd all probably like to know.
Oh, look, that was great, thank you. That's a great question. Well, first of all, it would have to be research results that could be printed on one side of one page. I'm not saying they're not good readers, they're very good readers. It could not use any jargon, which is second nature to me and to you. And it could not end with a sentence that said, and this is why we need to do more research, because it's inconclusive. Now, I mean, so I think it's fair to ask ourselves, and I've done plenty of research myself, how many times I ended my report with a sentence of that variation. Yeah? Anybody else ever do that? Well, that's not going to capture their attention. It's not that they're naive and think that we have all the answers, but if we don't have something definitive to say, they're not interested in hearing it. And if it's just an inkling of what we might do if we spend $5 million more and 10 more years, they're not very interested. So I think it's less the nature of the research than the conclusiveness of it. Yes, sir. Someone back here. Why don't you all sit so far back?
So let me, I want to take up the issue of audience. And one of the things that this community has learned is that we have a good understanding of when it is that kids drop off, drop out, opt in, opt out of STEM. And it's well before high school, well before high school. And yet, and I will generalize from the two examples you gave to the question about when you look across to other nations. You gave two examples of corporations selecting the students who have opted in and were part of the minorities that you have there, to then bring them into the fold and say, now we want you to come and be a part of our corporation. So it goes to the economic argument and the driver for the businesses. I haven't gone through your website and I don't know what efforts are being made to reach children in 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, because that's the sweet spot. That's what we know when kids are opting in or opting out of science and math, and then on to the other areas.
Nice job, Ray. Thank you. Well, don't tar and feather me for that I picked two examples. I mean, you're right, those were the two examples that I picked. I'll give you another example, which is one that I was personally involved in. This is before I was at Change the Equation, and I was doing freelance consulting. Intel Corporation understood, and this is my bias, that mathematics is the queen of the sciences, not the handmaiden, but understood that mathematics was often the stumbling block in 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade that really began to influence attitudes and so forth. And they also understood, well, they understood because I did a paper for them, I guess I should say, that the teacher was really key. That we could get only so far with parents, but if we had an excellent teacher, then we really were going to get somewhere. So Intel funded the development of a professional development course for teachers K-8 that they continue to deliver around the country. And it is not necessarily about, it's not a methods course, it's a mathematics course, but it focuses on the deep understanding of the mathematics that they are teaching in K-8. So that's just a different example, not one from overseas, but one that in fact is underway by a US company. The companies understand, and remember now when I say companies, these are enormous companies. So the folks who are doing corporate social responsibility, who are making these decisions, are often former teachers or people who have somehow been involved in education, and these people know the importance of third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. I mean, they know, and if they don't know, we beat it into them. So when you look at the STEMWORKS programs, you see that there's a very heavy preponderance of late elementary, middle school among them, which is partly a feature of who applied. I mean, we encourage people to apply. But many of the companies are, to me, incredibly strategic in thinking about how they want to get kids at an early age, and they want to get them enthused and inspired. And if they don't have the resources to follow, let's say in the middle school years, they try to find a partner, another corporation, who could fund something there. So there really is a deliberate and growing knowledge base among many of those. But even with that said, I have to go back to my earlier comment. If they all invested every single dollar that they had, it's still just a drop in the bucket. Keeping you busy, Randy.
We're good, making laps.
So I agree that the corporate social responsibility side of the equation is a very small amount, but I think a lot of these very large companies, in terms of their influence in the products that they produce, have other interests in schools besides, and STEM, besides this corporate social responsibility piece. And so in terms of, are these the companies that are producing computers? And so if there's a policy in our nation that we're gonna have more computer-based assessment, who wins? And I guess, so I'm just saying that there's more complicity here in terms of where their self-interest really lies in terms of the policies and things we put in place in schools. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. You all are a tough audience. I haven't had anybody on my side. No, just kidding. I think complicity's way too heavy a word to use, way too heavy a word, personally. I think that when I came to change the equation, and I started in July 2010, there were founding members of Change the Equation from Intel, Xerox, Time Warner Cable, Kodak, and Sally Ride, who was, may she rest in peace, her own persona. And they were recruiting other companies to join Change the Equation. They now call it the family and friends method, which is sort of akin to opening their Rolodex and saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna see Joe Blow. I'll twist his arm to do it. When I came, I put a lot more rigor into who was being invited. And I do not ask any company whose main product is education. There are a couple in there, and that's an artifact of history, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I deliberately do not, I'm looking for companies whose core business is something other than education. Now, you gave an example of technology. I don't know, that's sort of like saying that farmers shouldn't be advocating for good nutrition. I mean, I can just keep going with that chain of thought ad nauseum. And in fact, when all employers, when our economy is solid, which it hasn't been for a while now, when people are working and employers are doing well, including your employers, I would repeat, your employers have a lot of the same worries that the employers that I work with have. And they are not going to do something that's going to jeopardize their bottom line or their main reason for being. But we have certainly got to think of ourselves en masse and trying to do the best that we can for the largest number. And with that, I say thank you very much. I appreciated the time. I hope it was interesting.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Linda. Thanks all. Enjoy the conference. I'll see you.